Hello and welcome to another edition of Business7, the program where we do an in-depth look at the current issues dominating the economic and financial landscape in Namibia. Lined up tonight is an interview with Eben de Klerk. He is from the Economic Policy Research Association, and they've done a comprehensive analysis about empowerment legislation's impact on the economy and business in the country. We also talked to Graham Hopwood. He's from the Institute of Public Policy Research, and they've taken their yearly look at the transparency of SOEs. We also bring you the latest news from the manufacturing sector, and we'll talk about some other content. Stay tuned. Government has made yet another attempt at economic empowerment legislation. Now, the Economic Policy Research Association, or EPRA, has compiled a 44-page report on the implications should the new version of NEEEB be implemented. Talking to us is one of the members of the management of EPRA, Eben de Klerk. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Jomi.
Eben, before we start, what is EPRA?
EPRA is a voluntary association of businesses. Our membership exceeds just over 600 businesses now.
Okay, and all kinds, from all spheres, all kinds of experts looking at issues in the Namibian society.
Yes, so EPRA receives voluntary associations to especially look at policy and the investment and economic policy environment because our objective is to see more pro-growth in more and investment policies in our country, something that we severely lack at this stage, looking at our past performance over the past 4 years.
Coming back to your report on the new version of NEEEB, you call it a hostage situation. You talk about should it be implemented, it will enslave the private sector, and you even call it a business grab. Why?
What the bill essentially does as it stands now is that it will enable an individual effectively to in future issue standards which has to be complied with, because if you don't comply, the business will not get licenses and permits to operate to operate at all. They can even exclude you from certain economic activities, and there will be an exclusion from the procurement process. And through that, they're still unknown. Through that, private sector will have to conform to these standards, and one just hopes that it's not ridiculously impossible, and that's why we say that it's tantamount to having a gun to your head in private sector with a promise that they won't pull the trigger.
Even at the core of this legislation is the issue of business costs. What impact is it going to have on business?
Look, business is by nature a precarious venture. So business entails financial risk. It always involves some gap in the market that you fill either through expertise or a specialized product. So for a business to be successful is always precariously poised on balancing the inputs and the outputs. So once this type of legislation would come through, whereby you are effectively forced to change that situation and from the ownership through to the management, through to employment, the business, the people making the decisions and the business owners simply don't have that room to maneuver, and forcing people to take on additional ownership and so forth naturally adds cost to doing business, and very often it makes that business unsustainable and will make startups just unviable.
Government says this policy is meant to empower, it's meant to stimulate economic growth, employment, etc. But now, if NEEEB then impacts on the bottom line or the profit what are the chances of taking on more people, and how could it stimulate economic growth?
Yeah. The bill comes out on the premise of empowerment. It cannot possibly reach that objective for quite a few reasons. The premise is that if you reduce a specific person's involvement and ownership, that naturally has to be filled with somebody else that then achieves more and obtains more. The net effect thereof is that you firstly have not grown the economy. You cannot grow an economy by just replacing people. But most importantly, there is no means test, for instance, in the bill. The bill does not look at poor people. The bill simply looks at race division. And that division is purely along color lines. So it is inconceivable how a person that do not have business management skills and do not have access to finances or any money to buy into a business will ever be able to become part of that. So the little empowerment, if you can now call it that remains is pretty much the already well-off, well-educated persons that will start to take over that environment. The economic output will be less because your input cost is more. Your decision making as the entrepreneur is less. And on top of all of that, we are not creating an investment-friendly environment. This bill quite literally contravenes our international treaties. For those treaties say that countries that have signed those treaties with us must have equal access to our market. Now, we are creating a market where not even Namibians have equal access to the market. And by the definitions of the bill, all foreign investors will be excluded as beneficiaries.
And that is, in any case, a problem at the moment is investor-friendly policy. We have a massive problem with foreign direct investment in Namibia at the moment, in any case.
And don't forget that started, well, it started a bit before that, but it really took on speed in 2016 when the previous versions of this bill was promulgated, or not promulgated yet, but published. And in the same year also when the Investment Promotion Act was promulgated. And the Promotion Act is now under revision, fortunately. Those policies really harmed us, and that's why it's so shocking that we now sit with a third version of NEEEB that actually goes far beyond the reaches that it did in the first two versions, at a time where really we cannot afford these type of experiments. And unfortunately, we need to understand that the mere publication of this gives intent of where government thinks we are going. So it doesn't have to become law to cause substantial damage to our economy, and we have now 4 years of data to show that it will.
And that's precisely the thing. The mere fact that there is a version available fuels the current and persistent insecurity among investors.
Yes. Don't forget that there's not just a version available. There's a version available already passed by cabinet.
Precisely.
So it has status already, and that is unfortunately the problem that we have. And then we have been informed, and nobody was able to rebut this information, that they also do not intend to have further consultations on the document.
That was precisely going to be one of my questions. So the public will not have another chance to plead its case, the private sector.
It looks like that at this stage. We simply, through all our efforts, could not get confirmation that there will be consultations. No, but we are given the runaround all the time, but at very high level. People do not answer that. So the conclusion that we make at this stage is that they probably intend to pass this through Parliament without further consultation.
Eben, this is yet another example of a government intervening in the business sector. There has been previous policy statements and implementation of sort of taking an increasing stake in the private sector. Yeah. Can you sort of...
That's a very dangerous situation we find ourselves in, and one don't understand really where it comes from. I can assume it comes from the ruling party's stance that they want to increase socialism. Why that is dangerous is that one needs to understand where wealth is created and what ultimately supports your social safety nets, what supports your public healthcare system, your education system, your service delivery of land. It is through taxes obtained from the private sector. So if you take those taxes and you actually start competing with private sector, you actively reduce your tax revenue, you reduce your ability to increase the social safety net, to increase service delivery, human development, and that is where the ultimate empowerment lies, is through human development. We need to up our game in terms of education, health, and providing houses, providing serviced land, providing security, because that is the environment in which empowerment will grow and will grow sustainably, and the whole economy will grow with that. The type of intervention we see now is completely counterproductive and counteractive to that.
Even as a last point, it's a very complex discussion and I wish we had more time. But in your report, you also point out that NEEEB in its current version is unconstitutional. In layman's terms, why do you say that? Our Bill of Rights is entrenched. In other words, it can't be changed even by 100% majority in Parliament. And that's great. We are an extremely progressive country for our Constitution. The Constitution allows for discrimination, but it does not allow for the other rights, such as the property rights and the right of association and so forth, to be severely abolished through what NEEEB will ultimately do. So at least on the rights part, it will be unconstitutional, and it will on several other areas as well, especially given the fact that it appears that consultations will not be held, and that ultimately the whole bill is an irrational instrument. You know, laws must be made for rationality. We have seen in Namibia's past laws being made for the purpose of corruption. And if you look at who the only possible beneficiaries of this bill can be, one has to ask the question whether there's not an ulterior motive of actually furthering the interest of some individuals. Because I don't, and with this 4 years that has been going on, I've never really got the feeling that the people are asking for this. This is being pushed, I believe, from a self-serving position. And if that is the direction our country takes, we definitely will not see a better future pretty soon. Eben, thank you very much for talking to us. Thank you for the time and the absolute many hours EPRA has put into compiling this report. And best of luck with going forward. You're going to take the report to ministers, and you even want to take it to the president. The printers are finishing the printed copies today, and they will be delivered, so we will definitely send a few out today already. Yeah. Thank you very much for your support. It is no secret that the manufacturing sector in Namibia has fallen on hard times. In Business7 this week, we've spoken to Ronnie Varkevisser. He is the CEO of the Namibian Manufacturers Association. Visser says that for the past 6 to 7 years, the manufacturing sector contribution to the economy has declined. Now, some of the problems, as far as he's concerned, is limited access to finance, not enough government support, a lack of incentives for local manufacturers. We've asked him what he thinks about the growth at home strategy and whether it has been successful. Now, according to Varkevisser, the growth at home strategy has had very limited impact on the landscape, and he says it needs more focused and more implementation, or stronger implementation. Every year, the Institute for Public Policy Research takes an in-depth look at state-owned enterprises or public enterprises and bring out a ranking list where they look at their performance and information that is publicly available. Here to discuss the issue with us is the Executive Director of the IPPR, Graham Hopwood. Graham, welcome and thank you for your time.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me.
Graham, I'm not sure whether I should say I'm surprised or I'm appalled, because it's not really new news. This has been going on for quite a while, and yet the rankings, one can only say they're shocking. Can you just summarize in a nutshell what the rankings show?
Okay, well, what we did was we assessed the record mainly in terms of governance in 2019 of the 21 commercial public enterprises. So that's everything from Air Namibia to Namport to Nampower. And in the rankings, actually 4 of the public enterprises are doing pretty well. They scored above 80 out of 100, headed by Nampower. But below that, it's a fairly poor record. And what's happening, I think, is that a lot of public enterprises and do not publish annual reports or annual financial accounts, don't release hardly any information on what they're doing. And it's obviously a link between non-transparency and poor performance, because they're also the ones who tend to be losing money, never paying any kind of dividends, having problems paying taxes to the government. And what I found quite curious is towards the bottom of the list, there's some public enterprises that I wasn't really even aware existed, like the Luderitz waterfront and Hentis Bay waterfront. These seem to exist, but they don't do anything. They never publish anything. Some of them don't appear to have got money in the budget in recent years, so one wonders why they are still there. Obviously, we have had a Ministry of Public Enterprises now for 5 years, and they seem to have spent a lot of that trying to prepare the law or the legal framework to improve the governance, but we haven't yet seen any major impact. So I think the good news is that there are some that are doing pretty well, so then why do the ones below that not learn some of the lessons and actually improve their performance? One or two, like EPRA, which is the one that was set up to take a share in mining companies and to represent government in mining companies, they just don't seem to have a sense of purpose anymore. It's like government has lost interest in what they're doing, and they're not very active, or at least not as far as we can see from the public point of view. So it's, as you say, overall quite a depressing picture, but there are sort of some signs of hope that that if public enterprises committed to good governance, they could actually improve. And one of the points of this ranking is to try and almost make them compete against each other and say, well, okay, maybe we can get up by 2 or 3 places, or we can overtake this public enterprise ahead of us next year if we release our financials on time, if we report properly to the public via our website.
Graham, you've mentioned the Ministry for Public Enterprises, and they've had quite a couple of years to try and turn this around. Are you happy with the progress? I know the Minister on various occasions have cited various constraints, but do you think they could have made more progress in the past 5 years?
5 years seems an incredibly long time to get one piece of legislation through, and that seems to be the key piece of legislation that will give the ministry the power to ensure that certain public enterprises, these commercial ones primarily, do actually at least follow some basic standards, one could say. No one can be happy about it, but I think the minister has been really putting a lot of energy into it, and he's now got a platform to at least, I think, push on in the next year or so. But we don't know now with the change of government what will happen to that ministry and if there'll be changes in personnel. So one hopes the momentum that has been created, that seems to have generated, particularly with the passing of the Public Enterprise Governance Act, will actually continue in the next 12 months.
One of the things that are particularly upsetting, I think there's about 2 or 3 public enterprises that are up to date with their annual reports, and then about 5 or 6 that have the 17-18 financial year. And some of them don't have anything at all, and some of them go back as far as the last report in 2013. Why are they allowed to do this?
I think because there hasn't been any monitoring and evaluation, and hopefully that's now the role of the ministry with the new law. But they can do it without the new law, I think, to make sure that these public enterprises are reporting properly. Although it was too late to be captured by this report, we see a glimmer of hope at Namibia now, in the sense that they've now had, for the first time in 7 years, an annual general meeting. I don't know if they have an annual report, but at least they've produced some figures. We'd like to see a lot more in terms of how they're performing. But so, there are steps forward that can be taken, but we're coming from a very low base. We're coming from a situation where in Namibia, nobody can actually remember when they actually published an annual report or financials. It's so long ago. And yet each year they get this massive infusion of money from the budget. And it's totally unacceptable that taxpayers' money is used in this non-accountable way. And yet, as you say, it's gone on year after year after year. It's one thing to put in huge amounts of money, but it's another thing that we don't even really know what happens to that money.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Just on the Namibia issue, yes, they did release a press statement about that too, and the only figure that they've mentioned was the revenue. I contacted them and asked for more figures on that, or then a complete income statement, balance sheet, etc. And the feedback we got from them was that we're not allowed to have insight into those figures before it goes to the authorities. But then interesting, just announcing this huge revenue, and yet you have no idea what the bottom line really is.
It's actually misleading, I think.
I think so
because
too.
A lot of people think revenue is profit, which of course
Precisely.
it isn't.
And I mean, it's this huge amount.
Reading between the lines, they're still making huge losses on a monthly basis. So one appreciates they're trying to move in the right direction, but transparency is absolutely key. And one would think that with the minister being so interested and engaged in this transparency issue, that they would actually release all the information and get permission of government to do that.
Just on the public right to know what happens to their money, I know the IPPR is also very active when it comes to access to information. What is the current situation there?
Well, we were hoping that it might appear in this short period that Parliament's been sitting before March 21st, but it doesn't appear to be now on the agenda. So we are expecting it to come in the first session of the new government. It does seem that it has been more or less finished in terms of the drafting process, but of course we've been told these things before, but we hope that it will be an urgent priority post March 21st. Obviously then we have to scrutinise the bill very closely, but I hope it will change this culture of non-accountability. It's not just that we want to use the ATI bill and journalists and citizens can apply to get information, because that's a time-consuming bureaucratic process, but it needs to change the culture in government so that government is proactive and the public enterprises are proactive to release information before and make it available before we even start asking for it. That should be the situation.
Graham, always interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, great, thanks.
That's it from Business7 for this week. Thank you very much for watching, and we will be back in 2 weeks' time.